Welcome back. It is always a good day when I wake up and I give thanks. And I know that today is a day that I am allowed to introduce you to another just remarkable human. My guest today is Sara Rian. I will introduce her in just a moment. I just find it very fascinating the way that we connect on the planet. And of course, through the whole thing with the pandemic, we really kind of retreated into ourselves. But as we retreated into ourselves and got our little tight group closer, it also expanded where we went on the planet as far as reaching out and meeting other really remarkable people elsewhere. And it just expanded us in such a beautiful way. And so I for one, love social media. I find the best people there. I discover just brilliant writers and people with passionate messages. And this lady is one of them. She is a grief poet. She is an author, 4 books, 1 children's book. I'll post her links to everything. And I'll tell you what, when I started posting things on the Next Room Facebook page, everybody was like, oh my gosh, they're like, you could just visibly see the people that follow me in such connection and feeling her words through her pain. She's had quite a journey, and I'm so happy she would be willing to open up and to share it with me. So I'm going to introduce you to Sara, but first I just want to read this one post. This is from her Facebook page, and you can find her Sara Rian Books, and it's Rian, Sara Rian Books. Thank you to every person that leans in, excited to tell me a story, not afraid of the grief, even those who did not meet my person while alive. Thank you for asking what they were like, what it's like without them, for reminding that they are not forgotten and they mattered. So good. And I'm always saying, just ask people about their loved one. Let them know. Say, what was their favorite meal? What did they love to do? What is it that you loved about them? It's so important to open up and have those dialogues and have that conversation and really lean in, like Sara is encouraging us to listen. So thank you so much. Beautiful Sara Rian is here. Welcome to the Next Room.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am absolutely honored. I love your podcast. I love all the content, all the things you're talking about, everything you're doing to advocate for grief, normalizing it, normalizing death and dying, everything. So thank you so much for having me here.
It's a complete pleasure. I mean, I started reading your beautiful content and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need this woman on the show. And I semi-stalked you a little bit. And then I found out we have all this symmetry. We both have lost our mothers. Both of our mothers have transitioned to what is next, whatever that may be. And so we had that in common. And then I find out you're a Michigander. I'm like, okay, Sara has to come on the show. Sara, what was your mother's name? And I want you to start off by talking about your mom today.
Okay. My mom's name was Susan. Also mom, mama, all the all the nicknames, but Susan was her name. She was the definition of kindness. Um, Not one person could say a bad thing about that woman. She was first and foremost the best mom. Absolutely. I have 3 siblings. She was the best. All of us will agree. Um, she had a very rough childhood and upbringing and adulthood, if we're being totally transparent. And since she was a child, she had struggled with trauma and grief and, attachment concerns, all those types of things. So she had actually lived with um, mental illness since childhood. And yet, when you watched her as a mom, she just didn't skip a beat. You would never know that that person had ever struggled to feel loved because she loved so well. And I mean, spoke every love language there is to speak. just just a wonderful, wonderful mom, friend, human. Even with, we could say the demons, no matter how much her brain was trying to tell her, don't even bother living one more day. She just showed up and was so sweet and so funny, and just, she was absolutely amazing.
Mm,
I'm very lucky to be her daughter.
wow. And you have two other siblings?
Three.
Oh,
Mhm.
you have three. So
Three siblings. Yeah.
there's four in the
Mhm.
family.
Yes.
So did you know about your mother's mental health challenges as you were growing up, or did she kind of keep that to herself until you were old enough to be able to, you know, compartmentalize it and figure that out?
We were actually all aware. We were all the siblings were aware. She did try to show a transparency around mental health because she wanted us to treat people with respect and kindness. And she wanted us to understand that if folks were struggling with addiction, or in her case, suicidality, she did want us to understand that they were not flawed humans, and she wanted us to know empathy. And we, of course, learned that because we loved her and we knew how good she was. And so, um, whatever she was struggling with, we understood it was her brain and it was trauma. So we understood at a young age because we did witness, episodes, and we did witness things that would obviously be very apparent. And instead of leaving us just in the dark, they did try, family and herself tried to explain it the best they could. Um, and then I knew by 12 years old that I wanted to be a therapist because I wanted to help people, heal and work through things. And I wanted to help people like my mom. So I actually, her being open about her mental illness and the way she was, and, striving to get proper diagnoses and medication and stuff, actually um, created my career path for me. So,
Wow.
mhm,
Wow. So you are a therapist as well. And it
I
looks like
am.
you graduated from Michigan State University. All
I
right.
did. I did with undergrad and my master's.
Good for
Um,
you.
funny thing is, grief is not my specialty. I actually worked in sexual trauma and domestic violence, and I'm actually certified in sex therapy, and I specialize in the realm of sexual health. And that is actually my professional career. That's where it ended up going.
Wow.
And most folks don't realize, they hear therapist and then they see my poetry and they think I do grief counseling, and I do. Grief is always in the room with us, but yeah, I work with the most two taboo subjects, either grief with my poetry and sexual health with my therapy. So,
Wow.
yep, just always trying to work on the things that people won't talk about, I guess.
Well, I would assume that there's a lot of grief attached to domestic violence.
Absolutely.
I mean, my goodness. So they're not really all that far apart, what you're
Correct.
doing.
Correct.
So
Yes.
yeah. So at the age of 12, wow. Wow, Susan, what a remarkable daughter you have. Just incredible. Um, wow. So did you feel it was inevitable that your mother was going to transition and transcend and leave the earthly shell behind and move on? Did you have that fear when you were growing up?
Growing up, yes, somewhere I know that fear existed, and also somewhere along the road, I believe it was just protective mechanism. My siblings and I all kind of developed this belief that our mother was invincible.
Right.
She had survived several suicide attempts, and we truly thought she could not die. Not like we were glad they were never successful, but we almost had to believe that to continue on with our lives, and you know m- go to school and basically not chain ourselves to her in a bedroom. We had to almost in ways believe that she was going to survive this, and mental health and depression wasn't going to take her. So I do believe that fear was there. I almost don't totally remember it
Wow.
because yeah, that protection really built up a long, long time ago. So we were um almost more shocked when she died by suicide because we truly thought it wasn't going to happen and it was never going to take her, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So many thoughts running through my mind. When did the poems, the grief poetry start emerging? How
Mhm.
long after, or did you start writing prior to your mother's exit from the planet?
It actually was that same year, just a few months prior to my mom passing, I was writing about, um, gosh, I mean, romance, dating, good love, bad love. I was writing almost like a femme fatale style, kind of darker. To me, it felt like female empowerment writing. So a few months before I would actually share it with my mom. She loved writing. She'd always wanted to write a book. She's where I learned, I think, poetry, even though I didn't quite know it. Um, she would write us notes and we would
Mhm.
find her poems and she would just write us love letters and she was just beautiful. Her words were beautiful. So I would start writing poetry and I would send them to her and she just loved it. She did not care how dark it was, how intense it was. She loved that I was writing these short poems. I created my Instagram before she passed away. So it was not really supposed to be grief. There were few poems here and there writing about my grandmother who had passed in 2016, so just 2 years prior. Um, but that was a very different kind of death. It wasn't as steeped in trauma and shock. So I would share those, and my mom loved that I was writing those and loved that I was connecting with my grandma that way. And my mom was always trying to normalize death and always trying to prepare us the best she could for when people died, and understanding that we will always be connected and our souls will always be connected. Um, so in 2018, so in July of 2018 is when she died by suicide, and it was within days I actually started writing for her. Yes, within days. It just started coming out. It was like the only way I was functioning was by writing it through poetry.
Sarah, that's really cathartic and such a healthy space. And you being a therapist, I think you are self-soothing,
Mhm.
arguably the greatest pain I can't even fathom, nor would I want. Um, but it started pouring out of you. You had to get it out, or else it probably would have suffocated you. I mean, you needed to literally get that out. Um, do you have some poems that you will share with us? I would love
I
you to
I
read
have
some of your
one.
own.
Yes, I have one um that I thought might be a good one to share because it actually is one of my older ones. So this was one from 2019. This is from my book When Bones Bloom. That book was actually written when I reconnected with my now husband, and this book was about grieving while also falling in love and feeling love and support while having this like crater, of course, in my heart. So I thought this poem might be appropriate just because it was earlier in my grief and it still applies to this day. So this poem says, when it aches, I quietly tell myself that we will talk tomorrow. I know tomorrow never comes, but it gets me through today, and I have a lifetime of todays to go.
Oof. Mm-mm-mm. When Bones Bloom. That's the
Mhm,
name of the book that is in.
mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you aware that you were so uniquely talented? I mean, here you are. I mean, I can see that you don't have this enormous ego. You just seem so genuine and so loving in your words alone, the way that they are so stripped down and raw feels so authentic to me. Did you ever say, gee, I'm actually not a bad poet here? I mean, this is really astonishingly brilliant work you're doing.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I have not had that happen just yet where I said, gosh, I'm actually really good at this. Maybe one day I do believe all people should be able to step into that where we don't have to constantly talk ourselves out of being good at something. I am working towards that very much. I have a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to writing. To this day, people will still say, oh, you're a writer, and I'm not a real writer. I'm not a real author. That's what I always say. Right? I'm not a real
Right.
author. And I constantly have to remind myself that every time you say that, there's someone else who might be writing poetry who's saying, well, if she's not, then am I? Right. And
Right.
so I do try to watch that a little bit and say, if we're writing, we're real, right? I pinch myself, I'm a human, I'm writing. And to me, poetry can be so many things and look so many different ways. Even I've seen poems that are 3 words that have, just made me want to collapse. They were so beautiful. And others being pages long. And I know there's a lot of judgment and criticism about poetry, especially poetry on Instagram. And yeah, I'm not all about that. I love that people are writing poetry, whatever it looks like for them. And I think it is just pure art. Even if it's not your style, like what an amazing thing to be able to put words together like that,
Mm.
just right from your heart.
Yeah, amen. Get it out, just write, 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 write. It's one of the things I love to tell anyone that's grieving. They're like, well, what do you do? Or how did you handle it? And I said, I love pens. I'm kind of like a total pen snob, but I love just writing things down. I think it really helps. It's super cathartic. So that brings me to the healing process. Through your words, were you able to identify some healing patterns or some things that were helping you through your darkest moments with your grief, with your mother, Susan, now not on the planet, so you can't pick up the phone and call her?
Yes. When I say second to therapy, I'm very pro therapy, obviously.
Sure.
Poetry was it in terms of having something that did not rely on others. Obviously, I couldn't get by without my support system just being there and, loving my mom with me and loving me. But in terms of something I could do that didn't have to have someone else in the room with me, something else I could take with me, like tools you learn in therapy, was writing poetry. And by writing, I was able to see just how much my grief has changed. I know it feels like it'll never change, and it feels like it'll stay the exact same way and in the exact same shape and the exact same weight. But to see poems in the last 6 years, they started off very angry, and you could just feel the trauma. I was the last person to speak to my mom. She took her life just moments after we had spoken on the phone, and I carried the guilt. I still carry guilt, but it was much heavier at that point, and I was truly traumatized, and I didn't know what was safe anymore and who could die next. And what does it mean if your mom dies by suicide? And what does that mean about you? All of these things. And I was angry. I was so angry at the world for not keeping her safe and for not, treating her better. And you could see that in my poetry. And as it's gone on, you can just see, I can see that I've made almost peace with the grief being there and not as angry at the grief for existing. I understand it, why it's there. And another part, I think, through my writing, if anyone has read my work, you will see me talk to society often. I will talk to the people or you people or whoever, and you can tell I'm talking to the people who don't understand grief, the people who are trying to rush grief, the people who are trying to minimize it and medicate it and diagnose it. You can hear me speak to society, especially US. We are not a very death positive or grief positive. nation. And oh my gosh, the healing in that, to almost use poetry as, this voice box for, the soapbox for advocating for grievers. Um, that has been amazing. And that I tapped into over time. And that's a little bit more recent. And that has been just a wonderful thing that I'm so glad my poetry has also turned into, because not only am I very protective over my mother and the love I have for her and my grief, I became very protective over other people's love and other people's grief. And I just, if people are going to listen, I'm gonna use some of that spice, right? And I'm gonna
Right.
I'm gonna let people know what they should probably not keep saying to people who are grieving.
Ah, it's so good. It's so
Mhm.
important. There is no getting over. That
Mm-mm.
is the stupidest thing that you could possibly say. Or, well, it gets better. And it's like, no, because it is a unique journey that everyone has to figure out on their own. No one will do grief like you'll do grief. It is such a personal situation, and no one can tell you that theirs is heavier, darker, or more meaningful than yours. It's like, just stop with that. So the poetry's evolved. We're piecing apart things. And to me, it's like grief almost becomes this familiar, comfortable, not so favorite sweater that you keep in the closet, and sometimes you have to wear it and have yourself a good old fashioned sob fest, throw a few things, break some things, kick some stones. Um, and then other times it's just laughter and love, because the grief is so tied to the individual that you love so dearly that you no longer can physically hold. So that's just really good. I really believe that we need to get to the point that death is something we talk about all the time. My kids are always like, "Oh, there she goes again," because for me it is dinner conversation. A bunch of kids were over this past weekend because my daughter was home to do some wedding dress stuff, and all these 20 somethings were sitting outside on my little veranda of peace, love, and understanding, and we were talking about how important it is to just be present and to check on your friends and just to do the things that you love, not collect stuff, but collect those moments, those brilliant pieces, and just to really truly dig in and live. It's so very, very important right now. We've gotten, as a society, we've gotten kind of grabby about stuff and wanting to collect stuff. And quite frankly, the old phrase, you can't take it with you, really sticks. My dad always said that, you're not taking that crap with you. So get busy living. So, how are your three siblings dealing with their grief and the loss of their mom? This fabulous, funny, she spoke all the love languages. Susan was the real deal. So, how are they dealing?
You know, that's such a good question. All four of us, we all just kind of we really we went separate roads with it. I don't think one of any of us did it the same. My older sister, she had she has two sons, so my mom was a grandma when she passed. So my sister was the only one who not only was trying to figure out how to grieve as a daughter, but she was also grieving, helping her sons grieve their grandmother. And we often hear about males completing suicide, and it's a lot different when you hear about women and grandmothers completing suicide and explaining that to kids. Is it's confusing. So she had her hands full with that. And my brother, he that was, I mean, it's so hard for him. He was the only, he's the only son, and they had a very special relationship for that reason. And he adored her, and she absolutely adored him. And, he's a little bit more business. He's a little bit, um, probably less emotional out in the open. So I think he's probably dealt with a lot behind closed doors. And he's connected, with the siblings in the ways he can to connect with mom. And then my little sister, she actually, same as me, became a mother in these last few years. She's now got two boys, so she had to, become a mom again, get married, and she actually just went through pregnancy loss last year, all without my mom here on Earth. So, just a difficult path. And she was the baby, and my mom adored all four of us in every different way, whether it was because you're the oldest, the son, the baby, and she would just say I was her little rainbow. I didn't quite have a special title, but we were very close, just because. And so yeah, my little sister, she was the first, to become a mom without mom here, and then
Mm.
also, lose a child, before she was even born, and do that without my mom was very hard, and it's still very hard for her. So it rocked all of our worlds in such different ways. And you could see what a good mom we had, because, I mean, yeah, we are still feeling it very strong 6 years later. And that one interesting thing though is I don't recall the four of us really like sitting in so much anger like people often do with suicide loss. To us, it's almost like every day we had her felt like winning the lottery, because every day her depression was basically trying to kill her. And so I think, yeah, I don't recall, at least, I don't want to speak for them, but I don't recall sitting in anger all that much as we just felt so sad, and
Right.
just so sad that it took her. And we were really hoping we were going to get her, past the age of 55. And her birthday was 2 weeks after she passed. And so, we had an Elvis impersonator who was supposed to come surprise her, and all these things that she would have loved. And just to watch that joy, or anticipated joy, turn into such emptiness and despair. Um, to me, yeah, we understood she was hurting. We just were really hoping it was going to get better.
Wow.
Mhm.
You know what's amazing too of the timing of this? I just really don't believe in coincidence. I just think everything really, we're all connected, right? And here you are, it's September, it is National Suicide Prevention Month. Um, and we finally got to connect and do this show. And I just feel super empowered that we're here discussing such a difficult topic. And I really appreciate how just you are just so honest and just laying it out there. It's so important, Sarah. This is such a key position for you to be able to step into this. And you are leaning into this incredibly painful place to help other people. I mean, if one person hears this and picks up the phone and calls the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and says, "Hey, I need some help," then we've done our job. I really believe that. Let me just circle back. I want to be mindful of time because we're getting close to the end. But you said earlier that you will always be connected. What is my friend Sarah Ryan? How do what is that to you? Or do you give that thought about being here in the physical sense and then transcending to another space?
Mhm. So yeah, I won't say it from a religion. I'm not religious. I would say maybe there's a spiritual part of me. Um, and I believe that is there because of my mom. She has she had told me and my siblings our entire lives that there is nothing, including death, that would keep her from us. that no matter what happens, her love would fight through any barrier and make it through anything. And she would always make sure she was with us. And I believed that. And I still believe that. And no one can tell me that it's right or wrong. So because no one can prove me right or wrong, I hold on to that so dearly. That brings me such comfort. And of course, I am skeptical at times, and you will see that in my writing that I will, sometimes you hear me questioning in my poetry that I'm not sure if our souls exist and if anything about her is still here besides the ashes in the urn sitting in front of me, and how sad that would be if that were true. And here's all the things I would do if it were true. But most nights when I lay my head on the pillow, I think that somehow she is still with me and that her love was strong enough to keep her here in some way, whether it be a soul or energy or whatever that is. And I feel the same way about my daughters that I have now, that I'm like, I think it's going to take a lot more than death to keep me away from you guys. And you know, I'm
Mhm.
gonna say the same thing to them, and if they decide to hold on to that belief too, wonderful, and if not, I hope they find a way to navigate death. Maybe that maybe doesn't involve existing after, maybe once you leave here physically, if that's the end, I hope they find other ways to connect to their grief, but yeah, I choose to really believe most of the time that, it would take a lot to keep my mom away from us.
Ah, that's beautiful. I believe she is here now. I really believe that she has been with us this entire time. So I would like to thank you, Sarah and Susan, for being on the next room. Do you talk to her?
All the time.
Good girl. Good girl. Do you have one last poem? I want you to close out the show by doing some reading, and then I'll just be quiet, and that will be the end of the show because I have absolutely loved every second of this. I want to invite you back on anytime you put out a new book. Just shoot me an email and say, "Hey, Jane, I'm ready. Let's go." But sararyanbooks.com is where you can find my fabulous guest and all five of her books, four poetry, one children's book. I have a feeling that this prolific woman is going to be churning out many, many more books in the future. So please support her, follow her on social media. And, you know, as an independent author, all I can say is buy her books. It's the best thing you can do to say, hey, I get you. I hear you. Thank you for helping me through a very difficult time in my life, which grief is one of those. It's a biggie. And this lady will help you to at least be able to figure things out. And if nothing else, too, to spark maybe a fire within you to pick up a pen and start writing your own poetry. Who's to judge, right? Okay, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Okay. This poem is from my most recent book, Find Me There. This is actually the opening poem that inspired the title. Find me there, where sunsets glow, but it never gets dark, where pain doesn't exist and comfort is always felt, where everything you've ever loved finds its way back to you in the end, the place you went to when your heart fell asleep. My time will come to see you again, and you can find me there.